So last time with Battleground, we talked about how you can take these king stories with the really, really ridiculous concepts and actually make something that is surprisingly watchable when you adapt it to the screen. Even when you haven't adapted it to the screen yet, there's still such a possibility, even on the page, it could come off as totally and completely ridiculous. And of course, what that Nightmares and Dreamscapes miniseries did with Battleground actually did make Battleground work on screen. But then you have stories where you're not entirely sure if even on the page they can get away with the completely and totally ridiculous. So God bless whoever's idea it was to try to take a Stephen King short story about a sheet folding machine that is possessed by a demon or the devil or something demonic, and say, this barely works on the page if it does, even by by the standards of some of the directions King has gone. Usually he can make just about anything work as far as making something scary out of it, like we've been talking about. And this is, but the thing is even despite all of that, even despite a story so ridiculous and a monster so ridiculous, there still had to have been some pretty high expectations for this. When you see the three names across the top, which are King, obviously, and they got Tobe Hooper to direct it, and they got Robert Englund to star in it. For any horror fan, that's a pretty high expectation that needs to be met. And I don't know. Because they made some interesting decisions as far as the adaptation process goes, but they also surprisingly didn't change as much as you might think when you imagine them adapting this story to the screen. And it must have found some sort of following. I don't have a physical copy in front of me. I have the VHS somewhere in the storage with all the other, like, 1,000 VHSs that I have from however long ago. And I looked it up just to see how much it was going for. And this has been a while, but when I looked it up, there was, like, a Blu-ray that was way overpriced, a DVD that was way overpriced, and even that VHS I have for like $20. And prices like that lead me to believe, I don't know this for a fact, but they lead me to believe it must have found a cult following somewhere. It had to have. And I can actually see that pretty vividly, just kind of imagining that must be the case. But the thing about it is, as far as the story itself and giving it the benefit of the doubt, and King the benefit of the doubt in regards to the concept, because it feels like a very kind of rushed story on the page, where we have obviously our main characters, the cop, and in the movie he's his brother-in-law. I don't remember if that's ever established in the story. I felt like in the story if he was just his neighbor or something, but maybe I'm just forgetting. But they come to the very quick conclusion, bizarrely quick conclusion, like in less than 20 pages, that, a couple of people got sucked into this machine. It must be possessed by a demon. So, and his buddy just happens to know about all of this stuff and have all of the stuff, the incantations and all that. So, how wonderfully convenient. But talking about what you can find scary about the concept and about the story, because I don't know that the machine is gonna cut it. So, because you tend to, with King, you can really look in more cerebral areas for what exactly makes things scary. And like even the most, mundane stuff, it's what he puts around the stuff that can be what really makes it scarier than anything else. And I was just talking recently about how Christine is a story and movie about basically a broken friendship and the tragedy of that, and the way it surrounds the demonic car actually gives a lot of depth to that story, interestingly enough. And with this, you kind of try to look for what could be the human thing about it. Like, what is like an actual human thing that you can associate with a story so ridiculous and over the top to bring that fear to life? And I want to say it brings in the debate of if gore can be scary or not, because you look at, you know, movies like the torture porn movies like Saw and Host or whatever, and the question always came up about, are movies like that even scary anymore, or is it just the gross out factor or whatever? And I feel like when you're reading a story with gore in it, especially such vicious gore and what's happening to people, that it can be because you can't actually see it. It's like it's still the whole thing of like it's always more effective in movies when they don't show the gore versus when they do, and it's up to your imagination. And the fact that even though they're describing it so in depth and so meticulously, still not seeing it and just reading it, and the imagery that it puts in your head, and the fact that you can imagine it happening to your own body, gore can be terrifying in you know, in a book or story format. And so, is that going to translate to the screen? Yeah, probably not. But, I mean, you would think, you know, we got a director like Tobe Hooper who has... Now, it's worth noting real quick, obviously, Tobe Hooper is not a perfect filmmaker. At least to me, I don't think he is. I do think the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre is a masterpiece, and I don't say that lightly. And I'll recommend Eaten Alive to just about anybody I can, whenever the chance comes up. But for the most part, and you can argue whether Poltergeist is his or Spielberg's, of course. But he's also got a lot of weak entries in his filmography, so it's not too surprising that it would come out like this. But with the combination of all the things involved, you would hope that something came out of it. And like I said, if it's got a cult following, it probably found... Some people probably did find that. But looking at this, there are some things that can carry over from the story that ultimately make some of the things in the movie a little more effective. Most notably, just sort of the appearance in general of Mrs. Frawley when she comes in. It's like, because the story starts after the accident has already happened, and it's this whole thing that looms over the very start of the story, and we just hear the reactions, and like it makes him like puke instantly despite the shit he's already seen in his career. It tells us how bad it is. So to actually see Mrs. Frawley alive when she walks in and she's this happy older lady and everybody's happy to see her, you just kind of immediately, because you know the story, get kind of that, oh, Mrs. Frawley, no. When she first walks in and the movie starts, and then you kind of get to anticipate because you know something so terrible and horrible is going to happen. And it's going to be something that we see this time instead of it being, you know, implied at the start of the story after it's already happened, the aftermath of it. And then, you know, yeah, once it happens, it is kind of a terrifying scene because it's that King thing where it's like he has this way of like viciously killing the kinds of people that you don't typically viciously kill in these kind of things, whether it be children in some of his stories or older people like this who are like just about any of us probably know somebody just like Mrs. Frawley that we could never in a million years can or imagine anything like this happening to that person. And that's the beginning of the story and the beginning of the movie, and it's an effective start. But there are some other things that they've thrown into here. It is worth noting. It might take away from it a little bit. Like, it immediately sets up you can carry that over from the story, but it also sets up pretty quickly that it's just a campy horror movie. Where we have the moment when she's got her hand, like, right there, before she's actually killed, and it's like, it's trying to play up, I think, that she casually has it there, but it's almost like she's fucking with the audience, like saying, oh, is it going to happen to me or not? And then we know. But then, of course, this brings in the cop of the story, who is played by Ted Levine. Ted Levine with Saul Goodman hair, for some reason. I know this came much earlier, but still. It's hard to not notice, but, yeah, and it's also investigated by his buddy Mark, who, like I said, is his brother-in-law now, who he lets us know is his brother-in-law many times over. Now, I will say, as far as Mark goes, I do think his like, that is a character that needed more expansion, so his character actually makes more sense in the movie, I think, than he does in the story. Because when you read the story, I keep wondering, like, who the hell even is this guy, and how is he so involved in this? And he has some, good moments in the story where it's like he's heard about the machine, and he's like, I haven't even seen the thing, but I'm terrified of it because of what I've heard. And it's like, that kind of goes a long way in making a story terrifying. But to kind of give the guy more screen time and give us more of an idea of how they're in each other's lives makes it a bit clear about how the guy could get so swept up in what's going on here. So there is that. That's something that the movie was able to kind of take away from the story and make a little more clear. But then we have the addition of the Robert Englund character. He's not entirely an addition because he's mentioned by name in the story, but if I remember correctly, he's never actually like seen. We just know he's the dude that like runs the place. So the people who adapted it into the movie took it upon themselves to say, well, wouldn't it be cool if we made him like this sort of way over the top, almost mad scientist-like character with the weird crutches, the weird face, and the weird eye, and cast Robert Englund and let him do his Robert Englund thing. And it's something that you can appreciate, because you can look at it and say, Robert Englund feels like he doesn't belong, he feels maybe too over the top, but the thing is I don't think Robert Englund is capable of going too over the top. I think it's so, like, when you look at tone, I don't think it's ever the case of Robert Englund needs to try to keep up with the tone and be consistent. I think it's the tone. If you hire Robert Englund, it's the tone's job to keep up with Robert Englund and be consistent with him, rather than the other way around. So I can appreciate what he's doing here, regardless of how, ridiculous it all is. But that's also kind of the, I guess you could say, the selling point of the movie itself. And it's because, like I said, with the monster itself and the machine itself, there's not a whole lot to sell with that. So you can see why they decided to make this character not only a scene character, but kind of a big deal, and then make him such a character in the way that he is. So I can see that kind of stuff working, maybe more so in the idea process than what we actually see, but that's kind of the whole movie's execution. I wouldn't put any negativity on Englund. Englund's just here doing his thing, which is what we all want him to do, so there's that. And they also brought in that photographer character, who I like his presence here because there's something so eerie and mysterious about it. As it goes on further, it becomes kind of, his whole presence kind of becomes confusing. But I suppose you could say that just adds to the whole surreal quality to it, because they do manage to capture that a little bit. Just kind of the whole, like, for instance, when Annette's in the hospital, and it's just like the way this hospital looks and like the angles we get, there is something like really surreal and nightmarish about this, and the way she's like screaming for a doctor that doesn't seem to be there for a while, and then he just appears, and he's the most nonchalant fucker that apparently works in this place, probably. And I think with more along the lines of that, when you can capture like the sort of nightmarish quality, with stories like this especially, where King just went so far out of the whatever the hell you want to call it to come up with the story, yeah, going for the surreal works. It can work in a really effective way. And to actually make it feel like this seems like a nightmare you personally would have, at least the way it looks and feels. But a lot of that is absent here, and it probably would have made a stronger product as a whole in general if they kind of went more for that. But for the most part, it's just kind of this dopey ass movie about a demonic machine that they have to go as far as to do the whole exorcism thing. And once it gets into that territory is where it kind of gets into, alright, this is all stuff we've seen before, just within a dumber concept. So there's only so much you can do with that, on top of the fact of a lot of the acting in here. Like I said, anyone can be forgiven because that's what we want from him, but then you get stuff like the actress playing Sherry. I don't really know what's up with her, but acting probably isn't her strong suit. This is just like Graveyard Shift, when we talked about earlier, it's the first one we talked about, where it's like, you look and you might see a couple of recognizable faces, in this case Robert Englund and Ted Levine, but if you look at the rest of the cast list, who are these people and where do they come from? You go to their IMDb pages, and it's like I don't even know if it's straight to video shit, it's just random shit. And I don't even know if half of them are real. I don't know. But you can see why none of them are really people you've heard of outside of the main two. And it's because, what is it? Like, the actress that plays Sherry, it's like, I talked about people looking almost dubbed in Graveyard Shift, and it's back here again. Where it's like, her mouth is barely moving. It doesn't, sometimes it looks like her mouth isn't moving at all, and she's saying, the audio anyway, is saying clear sentences, and it's fucking weird. I don't know how that keeps happening in these movies, but yeah. And then another part of the adaptation process would be the whole icebox thing. And the icebox thing is kind of vague in the story too, but it's just a story being told to him by another person. And the idea of actually incorporating that icebox and like the birds inside it and all that, like, into what's happening to the characters is something, but it's almost like it's just kind of, it's almost just to say, it's almost like it's just for the people who read the story to say, hey, I remember that thing from the story, but it has a different purpose now. We don't know what that purpose is, but it's different than it was in the story. That's all that really matters. It's almost like an Easter egg that's not hidden at all. I don't know. To kind of add to the supernatural quality that's going on, but they go far enough into that. They didn't need to go any farther into the supernatural than it already does. And of course, this is just littered with, totally ineffective, scare scenes. And it may be the scenes like this that brought it up to a campy enough territory that it can find a cult following, I guess. But it's, I don't know, just most of it doesn't work. And it's just at random times it'll try to have this sense of humor, where it's, and it's like, it's a funny occurrence, but it always feels so out of place when they try that. And it's only a few times, but one in particular that stands out is when the machine almost eats the Ted Levine character and his jacket gets caught or whatever. And then when he goes home, he closes his car door and his jacket gets caught again, and he just has like a mini freak out. It's like a PTSD sort of thing. It's like, it's just this, I'm assuming it's supposed to be a humorous moment just kind of thrown in there. And as funny as it is in the moment, it doesn't really, it just kind of sticks out in this weird way. So, I don't know, even in a movie that's tone is like this, it still kind of sticks out in a weird way. So I don't know what the hell is going on, but then we eventually get to the ending, where the ending in the story, of course, is the cliffhanger, where the machine comes to life and it gets out, and then it just kind of leaves us on that cliffhanger, and we're under the impression that it just probably wreaked havoc everywhere. And I like the idea of them making that a second climax in the movie, that actually turns into a whole thing instead of just stopping there, because while the cliffhanger works perfectly to end a short story, I feel like if the movie ended that way, it would have just felt really cheap and kind of pointless. So I like that they took it, I mean, it's to no effect. It's still kind of a shitty climax and a shitty scene that just kind of ends. But I like the idea of taking it a little further and not just ending it at the cliffhanger. Because I don't think that would have worked as well in the movie as it would have in the story. But regardless of that, it still manages to find a way to end in the dumbest way possible, where we get one more little like epilogue, and there's the reveal, and it's with Sherry, and it's just kind of dumb. So the whole thing, I don't know how to feel about this movie. I want to appreciate it for like the camp factor, and I don't know. It's almost a little too dumb to be in that category, but there are some things here that I can appreciate, that I wish I could appreciate more, but it's only to an extent. So that's pretty much how I feel about the Mangler. I don't. So the next one, I think we're going to finally get away from Night Shift for just a little bit, and go into I want to say it's the opening story of Everything's Eventual, which was also an episode of the Nightmares and Dreams Games miniseries, so we're going to be going back to that. And then yeah, and then we'll just keep going. Like I said, I want to kind of alternate between feature length and TV episode and so on. As we get through all of these. So until whatever the next one is, that's it.